Thank you for coming and for coming to look at our exhibit. So many of you know about the mass incarceration in the U.S. concentration camps like Manzanar. But we're here with our exhibit, Only the Oaks Remain, to tell you a little bit of a different story of what happened before the mass incarceration, and to show you the difference in how the prisoners ended up there. Although my grandfather was in prison in Tuna Canyon, like Mr. Yoshimura was, I had no idea that had ever existed. I myself had never heard of it. I grew up in Burbank, just over the hill from the Tuna Canyon location, and all the years growing up, when I had driven past it, I only knew it as the Verdugo Hills Golf Course. I even played frisbee golf there one time, completely unaware that it had a dark history. Years after my dad's passing, my brother and sister and I were going through my dad's boxes in a closet, and we knew that he and his family had been in Amachi, just like a lot of other families were, but I had never heard about what had happened to my grandfather. So I came across a box of letters and postcards, old letters and postcards of my grandfather's, and it wasn't until I saw stamped across one of the old envelopes was Tuna Canyon Detention Station in blue ink, and I had no idea what it was. So I became really curious into finding out. So I read through the letters, and I ended up doing more research online, and I was able to find the Tuna Canyon Coalition. I contacted Kyoko Oda, who is the president of the coalition, and at that point she told me that my grandfather was in fact on the list of detainees, and his name was on an honor wall that was going to be in the Only the Oaks Remain exhibit, which is here today. She also told me that the exhibit was going to the Japanese American National Museum. So I was completely shocked to find out that my grandfather was held at this detention camp so close to where I grew up, and that I had never heard about it. So Shinsuke Sugimoto was an Issei, first generation Japanese, born in 1884 in Kyoto, Japan. In 1906, at age 22, he immigrated from Japan to Canada, and where he attended Western Business College, and he eventually became a naturalized British citizen in Canada. He later spent 2 years at Harvard. He majored in English literature and chemistry, and at 27 he traveled to England and Japan and lived and worked there. He ultimately landed in Northern California in Marysville near Sacramento, and he met and married my grandmother in 1918. They had 4 children. My dad was the youngest. He had 2 sisters and a brother. And my grandfather worked various occupations. He was in sales and real estate, accounting. He also served as the secretary of the Japanese Association of Marysville. Ultimately, they ended up moving to Boyle Heights in East Los Angeles in 1928. He was a hardworking businessman. He did what he had to do as a father and a husband. He worked at the YWCA as a janitor, and he also was preparing people's tax returns. So he kind of was doing all kinds of things. He also taught and practiced kendo, which is a Japanese martial arts, and he taught at the local dojo. On February 21st, 1942, the FBI arrested my grandfather. Though there were no formal charges, he was considered a dangerous enemy alien, solely because he was from Japan and he was involved in martial arts. His name was on a list in a kendo organization. The life he'd worked for so hard for was abruptly stripped away, and his freedom, due to the Presidential Proclamation 2525. He wrote in one of his letters, "Was arrested so suddenly that I had no time even to dress, so my business of income tax was so untidy." Although incarcerated, he worried about finishing his client's income tax return, Mr. Wakizi. My dad was just 14 when his dad was taken away, and his two sisters had recently married and were living with their husbands, so it left my Uncle Roy to take care of my grandmother and the family business. I can't even imagine how traumatic that must have been for the family, and for all the other families like Mr. Yoshimura's, to have the breadwinner of the family taken away so suddenly, and not knowing if they were ever going to return. As Dr. Endo described, Tuna Canyon held community leaders of Japanese, German, and Italian descent, and others. There were fishermen, there were teachers, there were reverends, doctors, and they were all separated from their family solely as a result of the presidential proclamations mentioned earlier. Guilty before proven innocent. For weeks, my grandfather was held in Tuna Canyon, uncertain of his future, and only just had a few short visits from his family through barbed wire. That March, he was put on a train to the DOJ camp in Santa Fe, where Mr. Yoshimura also ended up going to. Although I'm not sure if they actually knew each other. They were both there at the same time. When Executive Order 9066 came into effect, my grandfather, being so far away, was left helpless while his family was nearing the mass incarceration. Each family member could only take what they could carry, so my family had to ask their non-Japanese landlord if they would look after some of their belongings. A Kelvinator refrigerator, a gas heater, fans, and a few boxes of dishes, glasses, and utensils, and basically everything else, like their furniture, everything else in their household, they had to dispose of. After 3 long months, Shinsuke finally had a parole hearing before being transferred from Santa Fe and to join his family in Santa Anita racetrack. There, the Sugimotos were forced to live among thousands in tar paper barracks, which was considered fortunate since some people had to live in horse stalls. They were later transferred to Amachi concentration camp in Colorado, far from their home in Boyle Heights, where they had to endure camp living and the harsh weather for 3 years. I wish I could tell you that my grandfather was a survivor of this long, dark chapter in American history, but sadly, 4 years from the time he was initially taken to Tuna Canyon, and suffering 2 strokes while in Amachi, he died at 61 years old, still a prisoner, never to see his freedom again. I never had the opportunity to know him. I only know him through his stories, through his letters, postcards, and artifacts. I did do a trip to the National Archives, and I've received numerous information from our historian, Russell Endo. But we found that FBI files showed that the U.S. later questioned the fact that he should have been detained and arrested and imprisoned in the first place. President Proclamation 2525 applied to Japanese citizens over the age of 14 who were living in the U.S., and he was a naturalized British citizen. In the exhibit, you'll see on one of the panels, there is one of 3 handkerchiefs filled with signatures by prisoners from Santa Fe. There's a hand-painted purple flower, iris, in the center, which is fitting to be here in the gardens. And while I don't think Mr. Yoshimura signed it, there are 11 signatures on there that were from prisoners of Tuna Canyon. The handkerchief's now at the Smithsonian, along with some of his other artifacts, hoping that his artifacts will continue to tell the bigger story of what happened during that time. What happened at Tuna Canyon is still so relevant today. The barbed wire, guard towers, barracks, they're all gone. But our hope for Tuna Canyon, which has been designated Historical Cultural Monument 1039, is to be properly memorialized and to create an inspirational education for all to experience and reflect on this tragic history. To remember and honor the over 2,000 whose journey of imprisonment began at Tuna Canyon, which again is just 5 miles from here. And to teach the current and future generations so something like what happened at Tuna Canyon will never happen again. Thank you.